Welcome to Primetime Weekend. I'm Nicole Wallace. Let's get right to the week's top stories. The political earthquake that was the Democratic National Convention is still reverberating in Chicago and across our national politics. A short time ago, Vice President Kamala Harris departed Chicago, and she had a message before she took off. She heads back to Washington, D.C. with her campaign crackling and turbocharged by that show-stopping final night of programming at her convention, capped off by Kamala Harris's acceptance speech, a speech that not only detailed her uniquely American personal story and her unassailable professional credentials, but also issued a call to action, a to-do list, if you will, for her supporters. It was a speech in which Kamala Harris, the former prosecutor, delivered a scathing indictment of Donald Trump, laying out with surgical precision how Trump has essentially disqualified himself from ever serving as commander-in-chief again.
On behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America. And let me say, I know there are people of various political views watching tonight, and I want you to know I promise to be a president for all Americans. You can always trust me to put country above party and self, to hold sacred America's fundamental principles, from the rule of law to free and fair elections to the peaceful transfer of power. Fellow Americans, this election is not only the most important of our lives, it is one of the most important in the life of our nation. In many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man. But the consequences of putting Donald Trump back in the White House are extremely serious. Donald Trump tried to throw away your votes. When he failed, he sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol, where they assaulted law enforcement officers. When politicians in his own party begged him to call off the mob and send help, he did the opposite. He fanned the flames. And now, for an entirely different set of crimes, he was found guilty of fraud by a jury of everyday Americans and separately found liable for committing sexual abuse. We are the heirs to the greatest democracy in the history of the world. It is now our turn to do what generations before us have done, guided by optimism and faith, to fight for this country we love, to fight for the ideals we cherish, and to uphold the awesome responsibility that comes with the greatest privilege on earth, the privilege and pride of being an American.
It's where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. NBC News correspondent Yamiche Alcindor is back with us in Chicago after a whirlwind of a week at the DNC. Also joining us, fresh off his address to the convention in prime time, the Reverend Al Sharpton, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation and the president of the National Action Network. Also joining us, Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson and former Republican Congressman, MSNBC political analyst David Jolly is here. Yamiche Alcindor, there is no mystery anymore about what the objectives were. They were to share Kamala Harris's personal story, establish her credentials in law enforcement as a prosecutor, and it was clear by the end of last night that her commander-in-chief credentials are there. It was maybe to remind people of that, but then to undermine with the speeches from Leon Panetta and Adam Kinzinger and Ruben Gallego and others, and her strong defense of what it means to be an American, to essentially disqualify Donald Trump as not just unserious, but as a serious threat.
That's right. I mean, Democrats came into this convention and what they wanted to do was put on display that this is not just an election about Vice President Harris and former President Trump. It's really an election, they believe, about the future of this country and whether or not you want to be a decent and kind and inclusive America, or where you want to go back to a time when America was not inclusive and where people were discriminated against based on race and gender and all sorts of other identifiers. That was the thesis of this. And of course, the thesis also was joy. They were really leaning into this idea that Democrats are going to be able to usher in a future in America where people can feel hope again, where people can feel good again, where people can feel enthusiastic about the future. And in that speech last night, what we saw from Vice President Harris was really a speech where she laid out her credentials, but she also laid out the personal reasons why she sees the world the way she sees it. And she talked over and over again about her mother. And while she didn't talk about explicitly the fact that she's making history as the first Black woman, first South Asian woman, first woman of color to be at the top of a major party ticket, what she did was show America. And she said, my mother told me, don't let anybody tell you who you are, show them who you are. And in this speech, over and over again, she was showing America, I'm a child of immigrants, showing America, I know what it means to watch your mom spend a decade trying to save money to buy a house. I know what it means to be a prosecutor and see women who have been sexually abused then be re-victimized by a system that might not allow them to have that reproductive health care that they need in order to not continue to be victimized after they were victims of sexual abuse. So she was really tying her personal story with all of the policy positions that a President Harris might enact. And in some ways, it really, I think, underscored, as someone who's been covering her for now more than a decade, it really underscored who she is authentically. And she leaned back into this Kamala Harris for the people. In 2019, I was talking to a source. There were consultants and other people who sort of pulled her away and said, you need to use other phrasing, use other things. This is a speech where she said, I'm going back to my gut. I'm going back to the center of who I am. And I am Kamala Harris for the people.
Let me show you that section that Yamisha's talking about, where she talked about her mom.
My mother was a brilliant, 5-foot-tall, brown woman with an accent. And as the eldest child, I saw how the world would sometimes treat her. But my mother never lost her cool. She was tough, courageous, a trailblazer in the fight for women's health, and she taught Maya and me a lesson that Michelle mentioned the other night. She taught us to never complain about injustice, but do something about it. Do something about it. You know, our opponents in this race are out there every day denigrating America, talking about how terrible everything is. Well, my mother had another lesson she used to teach. Never let anyone tell you who you are. You show them who you are.
This was, it's hard to judge what was the loudest applause line, but that was up there, Rev.
No, it was very much up there. I think there were several things going through people's minds when they were listening. One, the kind of the way people are raised, and they share the human experience that shaped them into being them. You don't hear that a lot from politicians, and certainly not in the age of Donald Trump. I don't think I've ever heard Donald Trump refer to his mother or any lessons he's learned. So I think that it was very significant that this probably the largest audience, television audience and American audience that she has addressed, gets to know how she was in many ways raised by her mother and what her mother really put into her, the principles. And I think a lot of people could identify with that. And then saying that her mother said, don't make excuses, show people who you are, that she's not coming as this, is being projected by the Trump people, somebody that wants to get handouts or give handouts or comes from that background. She's a self-sufficient, self-standing person that wants to see an equal, an even playing field, but does not want to go into this whole kind of imagery that they tried to project. I thought it was very effective for her to talk about her mother.
I want to show you, Madam Secretary, what she had to say about dictators rooting for Donald Trump.
I will not cozy up to tyrants and dictators like Kim Jong-un who are rooting for Trump, Because, you know, they know he is easy to manipulate with flattery and favors. They know Trump won't hold autocrats accountable because he wants to be an autocrat himself. And as president, I will never waver in defense of America's security and ideals, because in the enduring struggle between democracy and tyranny, I know where I stand and I know where the United States belongs.
Madam Secretary, she takes this thing we all know, right, that Donald Trump is a threat to our democracy because of his actions before January 6th, but especially on January 6th. She ties it to something else we all know, his affinity, his bizarre affinity to Kim Jong-un. He talks about the, quote, beautiful love letters that they wrote one another. And then she makes it clear, not just that she's going to protect us, but that we know who we are. She puts us in this story about democracy versus tyranny in a way I really haven't heard anybody do in the 4 years since January 6th.
Yeah, and you know, I was there at the convention in part spending time with Harry Dunn and Aquilina Gonell, two retired U.S. Capitol Police officers who were there on January 6th. And the three of us were really moved by the fact that our experience defending democracy was validated and heard and seen and talked about, and the connection made between what we've endured defending democracy on the ground these last several years and the global implications that we all have to hold dear about not standing to defend democracy in this moment, what that means, and the choice that every American citizen has this year about who we're going to be moving forward. Are we going to continue moving forward to become a truly multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural democracy that is the bedrock of who and how we as a country were founded? And to share that moment with those two heroes was really moving. So hard to even watch it back and not get choked up, because we've endured the threats that democracy has endured personally these last several years, and we know what's at stake. And I hope every American citizen knows the choice that they have now before them. And I hope everyone chooses democracy.
David Jolly, let me show you something that starts with her sort of laying out what he intends to do. She says, consider what he intends to do if he's president once again.
Every day in the courtroom, I stood proudly before a judge and I said 5 words: Kamala Harris for the people. And to be clear, my entire career, I've only had one client, the people. Consider what he intends to do if we give him power again. Consider his explicit intent to set free violent extremists who assaulted those law enforcement officers at the Capitol. His explicit intent to jail journalists, political opponents, and anyone he sees as the enemy. His explicit intent to deploy our active duty military against our own citizens. Consider the power he will have, especially after the United States Supreme Court just ruled that he would be immune from criminal prosecution. Just imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails, and how he would use the immense powers of the presidency of the United States, not to improve your life, not to strengthen our national security, but to serve the only client he has ever had, himself.
You know, David Jolly, I thought what she did so effectively there is have this conversation with the whole country, the millions of people watching, that we've had for 8 years about guardrails, and how in a second Trump presidency, and now completely unshackled with any concerns over his own criminal exposure because of the Supreme Court's immunity ruling, that this would be, you know, to put it to the country, imagine what he would do without any guardrails, without even a Bill Barr to stop him on January 6th, without even a Mike Pence to refuse to do this coup thing, without the fear of criminal exposure because of the Supreme Court's ruling.
Donald Trump is a threat to the country as we know it. He's a threat to democracy, and her recitation of that threat is a recognition of kind of what has brought together this coalition that has been there, as you say, Nicole, for the last 8 years. But I think even beyond that, what she did and what this week did is really provide a capstone to the last 8 years in a very special way. I think that coalition that came together loosely around the threat of Donald Trump, that coalition really came together this week in a way it never has before to actually move the country forward together, not just to stop Donald Trump.
Yamiche, thank you for your reporting all week long, from parts not always convenient, and for making it and bringing us all of your great reporting. We're really grateful for you to make time for us today after such a long week. Thank you. David, the Rev, and Jocelyn Benson, stick around a little bit longer with us. We'll have much more. We'll show you much more of Vice President Kamala Harris's historic speech.
Let's be clear about how we got here. Donald Trump handpicked members of the United States Supreme Court to take away reproductive freedom. And now he brags about it. In his words, quote, "I did it and I'm proud to have done it," end quote. And understand, he is not done. As a part of his agenda, he and his allies would limit access to birth control, ban medication abortion, and enact a nationwide abortion ban with or without Congress. And get this, he plans to create a national anti-abortion coordinator and force states to report on women's miscarriages and abortions. Simply put, they are out of their minds. And one must ask, why exactly is it that they don't trust women? Well, we trust women. We trust women.
We're back with the Rev, Secretary Benson and David. Secretary Benson, if you want to know which one line of the whole speech most got under Donald Trump's skin, you can go find his post wherever it is that he posts things. And it's some outrageous lie, I won't even repeat it, about reproductive freedom and an absolute fabrication about his record and what he plans to do if reelected. But that one line, they are out of their minds, could apply to so many things. But when you look at the huge numbers that support access to abortion health care and support Roe as it was before Dobbs, it's just a perfect way to put Trump's positions in the extreme category they belong.
Yeah, and it's the idea of trusting women, trusting citizens. All of that is a thread that weaves through really the choice that's going to be before voters this fall. Do we, in an effort to overturn democracy suggests you don't trust voters' power and ability to make their own decisions. An effort to block or overturn reproductive freedoms suggests you don't trust women to be able to know what's best for their own economic and life choices. And so all of that really, the sense that we, the American citizens, deserve to be trusted in a democracy by those who lead our country is really a powerful framework for us all to think about as we select not just who we want to lead our country, but who we want to lead us in states and federal offices that will also be on the ballot this year. And really, I think, drives a stark contrast that underlines, what democracy is all about. It's about a government that trusts the people to make our decisions for ourselves.
Secretary Benson, you're from Michigan, one of the most important battleground states. How do you feel at the end of these 4 days? How are you feeling about the state of the race?
Well, I'll just say this week in Chicago, for me, was, among many things, a celebration of women uplifting women. It's what we've lived through in Michigan these last several years, and the success, the results for all that come from women working together and supporting each other, trusting each other, and lifting each other up.
As Vice President, I have confronted threats to our security, negotiated with foreign leaders, strengthened our alliances, and engaged with our brave troops overseas. As Commander-in-Chief, I will ensure America always has the strongest, most lethal fighting force in the world. And I will fulfill our sacred obligation to care for our troops and their families, and I will always honor and never disparage their service and their sacrifice.
To be Commander-in-Chief of the United States, atop the most formidable armed forces our planet has ever known, is to be actually the single most powerful person in the world. And when Vice President Kamala Harris makes the case that she is trained and ready to bear that responsibility where her opponent has already failed, she isn't making the case alone. In the spirit of coalition building and making direct appeals to the far corners of the American electorate, the Harris-Walz campaign wants voters to hear from other trusted voices on this topic in particular. For instance, speaking to, and perhaps on behalf of, the entire national security apparatus and community, especially those who've stayed silent. Former U.S. Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta made the distinction crystal clear.
So we face a critical choice: to vote for someone who stands with our military and stands up for democracy, or someone who will disrespect our heroes and undermine our democracy. My fellow Americans, there is only one choice. One choice. And let me tell you something. When she takes her oath of office, as she will this January, our allies will cheer, our enemies will fear, and we will have a commander-in-chief that we can trust.
A similar case made to perhaps a slightly different audience shortly thereafter. Here's former Congressman Adam Kinzinger, a veteran, former Republican congressman, a member of the January 6th Select Committee, speaking directly to his fellow Republicans.
How can a party claim to be patriotic if it idolizes a man who tried to overthrow a free and fair election? How can a party claim to stand for liberty if it sees a fight for freedom in Ukraine, an attack pitting tyranny against democracy, a challenge to everything our nation claims to be, and it retreats, it equivocates, it nominates a man who is weirdly obsessed with Putin? And his running mate who said, quote, "I don't care what happens in Ukraine." Yeah, and he wants to be vice president.
And finally, no conversation about U.S. national security is ever complete without input from the men and women in the military, the men and women who wear uniforms. When he delivered his remarks, Arizona Congressman Ruben Gallego, formerly of the Marine Corps, stood on stage with fellow veterans to thunderous applause. As for the choice in front of voters this November, here's Congressman Gallego.
These veterans represent the best of our country. We stand united as veterans, Democrats, and patriots to fight for everyone who served. But politicians like Donald Trump, they don't stand with us. They call patriots like Senator McCain losers. John McCain was an American hero. Show some respect.
Show some respect. Wow. Having made the case that the United States' position of global leadership is on the line in November, Vice President Kamala Harris was very clear. This election is not only the most important in our lives, it's one of the most important in the life of our nation. Retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel, the founder of Democratic Majority Action PAC, Amy McGrath, is back. Plus, former Deputy National Security Advisor under President Obama, Ben Rhodes, is here. And chief political columnist, the host of the podcast In Politic for Puck, MSNBC National Affairs analyst John Heilemann is here. John Heilemann, I looked at the program at the beginning of the night, and I wasn't sure where Leon Panetta and Ruben Gallego fit in. I've had the privilege of speaking to both of them. They're incredible. But once Kamala Harris got into the national security section, not just her credentials, but her indictment of Trump's, it all clicked into place. And I heard in Leon Panetta's remarks something that I'm sure we've all heard privately from the kind of men and women who don't want to politicize their former national security agencies, but this scathing indictment of Trump's lack of fitness. What did you think of that presentation last night?
Well, Nicole, happy Friday, by the way. I thought that I've covered Leon Panetta basically my entire career in different administrations, and that he's not Oprah Winfrey, and he's not Bill Clinton, he's not Barack Obama, he's not Michelle Obama, he's not a high wattage star. I think that was by intent. I think there was a reason, a very good reason, why we didn't see Beyonce or Taylor Swift or anybody else last night. This was supposed to be a night last night was going to focus on Kamala Harris alone. And Leon Panetta is the perfect surrogate for that, because he is someone who, though most Americans who don't live in the political world don't know, Leon Panetta is a guy who has served Republican administrations, he's served Democratic administrations, started his career in the Nixon administration, has served at the CIA, has served at the Pentagon, has served at the OMB, has served in the White House. He's someone who, in terms of understanding the interplay between the executive function and the military and the intelligence operations and the Hill, is maybe as well versed and as credible, as credible as anybody on earth, arguably more credible than anybody currently living. And so for me, I thought this is the kind of surrogate you want here, which is someone whose credibility is unimpeachable, and someone who also is not going to be anyone who is going to steal any of the limelight that should be focused on the nominee tonight. And I thought he did a great job in terms of how he made the argument. I mean, on paper, it is the right argument to be making from a guy like Leon Panetta. And if you put it together with Adam Kinzinger, you have a very powerful 1-2 punch on the national security front, I think, for last night in terms of doing the work they want to get done for her.
Yeah, I mean, Amy, I thought this was, and I agree with all of John's analysis here, but I thought this was some of the best constructed arguments because they came at the millions of people viewing from home, from every place. They came from a veteran. They came from this long, trusted hand speaking almost in monotone, without hyperbole, without any flowery language, just his sort of testimony to Kamala Harris's superiority over the alternative in November. And then Adam Kinzinger was the one who kind of came in with the barn burner indictment of Donald Trump's lack of patriotism, lack of fitness, and affinity, weird affinity, he said, for Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, it was the perfect 1-2 punch because you had Leon Panetta that really made people who may not know Kamala Harris, who care about national security, who worry about, is this person ready to be commander-in-chief? You had somebody of his background and his experience vouching for her, saying, we need her behind that resolute desk. We need her as commander-in-chief. And at the same time, reminding voters how bad Donald Trump is. And Adam Kinzinger did a perfect job of, he wasn't talking to the Democrats who were in the United Center. He was talking to fellow Republicans. He was talking to independents, basically saying, look, the other party has lost its way. And how can you call yourself patriotic if you follow a man who would not agree to the very basic premise of what American democracy is all about, and that is the peaceful transfer of power. And I think he did that so effectively last night.
Ben Rhodes, let me show you a little bit of Adam Kinzinger's speech about the Democratic Party, speaking directly to Republicans.
I've learned something about the Democratic Party. And I want to let my fellow Republicans in on the secret. The Democrats are as patriotic as us. They love this country just as much as we do. And they are as eager to defend American values at home and abroad as we conservatives have ever been. I was relieved to discover that because I've learned something about my party too, something I couldn't ignore. The Republican Party is no longer conservative. It has switched its allegiance from the principles that gave it purpose to a man whose only purpose is himself.
Ben, I said in 2016, after Trump's acceptance speech to Lester Holt, the Republican Party died in this room. And it didn't really land. I felt it because I'd worked for Bush and McCain, and I knew how Trump was different. But to hear someone who was a Republican member of Congress say that the party doesn't exist anymore because it has abandoned its principles and its only purpose is to support Donald Trump, was such an impactful thing for me as an ex-Republican. And I'm sure that just had special resonance as not just someone who's comfortable with Harris, but someone who's there campaigning for Harris as the only choice on questions of national security.
Yeah, and he didn't look uncomfortable to be there, Nicole. He looked like he was in the right place. He looked like he was wearing a suit of clothes that fit him, And look, I mean, in terms of the slowness from 2016, for some people to come around to that view, it's now been a decade almost of Donald Trump dominating this party. So you can no longer say to yourself, well, Trump's an aberration, or, well, if Trump gets in there, maybe he'll hire people that are familiar to me as Republicans. Like, no, we're now through the third election cycle in which this has become increasingly about the interests of one man. And the couple of ways that I think it was particularly effective that dovetail with the Kamala Harris speech are, number one, the Democrats, from the first night of that convention through to the very end, were very assertive about American patriotism. I mean, there was a through line in all those speeches, from the symbolism to the rhetoric to who was on stage, about a big, inclusive American patriotism. And that was, I think, an intentional effort to say, this is our flag. Freedom is our word. Like we stand for the things that should unite Americans, not just Democrats themselves. So Kinzinger kind of validating that from the outside, I think makes that feel more credible. And at the same time, the critique from Kamala Harris of Donald Trump on both national security and on other issues in politics was that he's only in it for himself. You know, he's got one client, it's himself. He likes these autocrats because he wants to be one, right? And I think that ties it together too, because Trump's not in it for the country. Trump runs down the country. He attacks war heroes like John McCain. He wants to politicize the military to serve his own interests. So it all kind of ties together, Nicole, into one message, which is what you hope for at these conventions, which is the Democratic Party is a big, inclusive, patriotic party that stands for American values. And the Republican Party has become the vehicle for one man's personal interests and ambitions.
After the break, according to new polling out of the Lone Star State, our next guest is within the margin of error in his race against Ted Cruz in Texas. Congressman Colin Allred of Texas will tell us about his plan for the next 74 days to defeat the Republican senator. Don't go anywhere.
In the NFL, we had a term for guys like Donald Trump and my opponent, Ted Cruz. Me guys. You know the type. Talk a big game, only care about themselves, but you don't want to be stuck with them at a barbecue. The truth is, America has never been about me. We will protect and restore reproductive freedom. We will secure the border. We'll protect Medicare and Social Security. And we'll turn the page and write a new chapter for this country. And let Kamala Harris be the next president and beat Ted Cruz.
Congressman Colin Allred last night with a brutally honest and important message for the me guys out there, people like Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, that despite their efforts against it, democracy is and always has been about us, we the people. Joining us now, the aforementioned Democratic Congressman Colin Allred of Texas, fresh off that address to the Hall in primetime last night. How was that? Tell me what that experience was like.
Hey, Nicole, thanks for having me. Yeah, it was great, and it was a unique experience for me. What I wanted to do in the short bit of time I had was introduce myself, talk about how important this election is, but also that we all know guys like Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. Anybody who's been on a team, anybody who's had to work in a group setting knows what I'm talking about. There's those guys who take all the credit, who don't do any of the work, who you can't count on in a crisis, and they're the guys who hold you back. And you can't have too many of them in any kind of team setting. In the NFL, locker rooms have a way of kind of churning those guys out. You see them bouncing around the league, going from team to team, even though they're talented. In the Congress, we have reached too many of them. And for Texas, we can't afford 6 more years of a guy like Ted Cruz who only cares about himself, but also when he's part of his self-interest is taking away the rights of Texans. And a lot of this convention was about stories of Ted Cruz's Texas, where Texas women were telling their stories about losing their fundamental freedoms and their rights to making their own decisions about their body. Where we're talking about how he has prevented us from securing the border, how we have to protect Medicare and Social Security. This is what Ted Cruz has made us into. And this convention in a lot of ways was about that.
It's such an interesting point. I watched every minute of it, and I didn't think about that. But we also heard from a Uvalde mom. So this is Ted Cruz's America that we're all living in when it comes to doing nothing about gun safety, something that upwards of 70–80% of all Americans want. Kate Cox was the Texas woman who spoke during the roll call about not receiving abortion health care. Again, 76% of Americans supported Roe, and he took that away. And his role in stopping the Biden-Harris administration from doing anything on immigration. I wonder if you can speak to the effort by the Harris candidacy to depict these things not as masculine or strong, but as cowardly and weak and small.
Yeah. Well, I think that they are pursuing the right path there. And, you know, for us in Texas, you know, we're used to having independent leaders who put Texas first. We have a long tradition of this. You know this, Nicole. And in a lot of ways, you know, Ted Cruz is a follower. He's a follower who just is trying to kind of, you know, feed off of the scraps of, you know, his leader, who in many cases is doing things that are not in Texas interest. And so what I've always tried to be is somebody who, listen, I'm a Democrat, obviously, but I'll stand up to my party when I think that we're wrong. And, you know, what we have to do is also put these folks in the right context. That for us, you know, we don't have to be embarrassed by our senator. We can get a new one. We don't have to have a small senator who's a follower who doesn't get things done for us. We can get a new one.
This has been Primetime Weekend. I'm Nicole Wallace. Please tune into Deadline White House and all of our primetime shows weekdays on MSNBC.